We're going to be in Luke chapter 2 here in a little bit. Before we get there and going on with the message, with the teaching, tonight we have a community celebration. I'm loud, so you're going to hear the celebration good. Community celebration. So Austin, who was up here earlier, he said that we are no longer calling him intern Austin. He is now pastoral resident Austin. All right. That did not come with a pay increase at all, but we are excited for that. Also, our pastoral resident Austin this past week became engaged. Woo! To be married to Maddie, who is a part of our community as well. Super exciting. We love you guys. We are here for you. We want to encourage you. Love y'all. So excited. Now, some of you may think, aren't they a little young for that? Austin, like me, we're a little bit older than we look. But what you may not know is that Austin and Maddie have been dating since the 7th grade. The 7th grade. That's as long as Alex and I have been together. Not since the 7th grade, but since they were in 7th grade and we were sophomores in college. Since the 7th grade, they've been dating. And I think about that, and I think about myself in 7th grade and trying to put myself into those shoes of then meeting the person that you would spend the rest of your life with. It's kind of mind-boggling for me. The reason for that is in 7th grade, I was not a great human being. I was helplessly addicted to my present that I got on Christmas in 7th grade, which happened to be the coolest flip phone ever. So this was a day, if you can remember it, before smartphones. We didn't have that term. We didn't know what that was. But I had the smartest of the dumb phones. So it was this silver Samsung flip camera phone. And it just didn't have the screen when you open it up. It had the screen on the backside, too. It didn't just call. It didn't just text. It didn't just have games. I got to go on the internet. No more awful dial tone, that terrible noise that still keeps me awake at night sometimes. None of that. I could do that all from the palm of my hands with the cell phone. I loved this thing. I was one of my very few friends that had a cell phone. I had to get home from basketball practice, and so I had to call my mom. At least that's how I justified it. And so I got this cell phone, and I loved it. I was attached at the hip to it. I know none of you can relate to any of this about being attached to a cell phone, but in 7th grade, forgive me, I was. And I remember one time, it was after a basketball game or practice or something, when the impossible and inevitable happened. I reached into my gym bag to grab my cell phone, and the cell phone wasn't there. Right? If you've ever left your phone at home, you know, or you've ever lost your phone, a lot of us kind of know this panic, right? I am disconnected from the world. I can't do anything. I am back in the Stone Age, and I can't even tweet about it. This is awful. And so I go into panic mode. I retrace my steps. I think, where was the last place that I had that phone? And so I go and I look all in my bag, and I look in my pockets, and then I go and run to that locker room, and it's middle school, so you open that up, and there's that cloud of Axe body spray that comes in, and I kind of waft through the cloud, and I look down, I look all over my locker, it's not there. I go up to the bleachers, I start looking around there. I look on the bench, which is where I spent most of my time in basketball, and I'm kind of cleaning up down there. I can't find this thing anywhere. It's gone. And so I realize that it's lost, but I remember, and I said I'd play the scenario out. There's a lost and found there in the front office. So I said, you know what? I just need to hike up to the main office. I'm going to go there. I'm going to ask for my phone. They're going to give it to me. All will be well in the world. Birds will chirp. There will be a deer out panting, and everything will be perfect. So I do that. I make my way to the front office. I get to the front office, and I kind of play this out in my head. I thought it was going to be really simple. I go in, I say, hey, I lost my phone. They reach into a box. The nice lady hands it to me, go on my way. But I get there, and I say, hey, I lost my phone. And she asked me a question that I wasn't ready for. She said, well, what does it look like? And I wasn't ready for that because I just thought it's my phone. Of course it's mine. Give it to me. But, luckily I had spent so much time sleeping next to that thing and curling up next to it and texting my, church camp girlfriends. I knew so much about it that I could easily describe it to her. I said it's the silver flip phone. It's the Samsung. It's got the camera, and it doesn't just have the one screen. It has the two screens. You can text, and you can call, and you can play games, and you can also go on the internet. It's that one. So she reaches it down and pulls it out, and everything's fine. Now, why do I tell you that? I tell you that because in order to claim something as ours, we've got to know what it looks like. In order to look at something and say, that something is mine, we should know how to describe it. And so this teaching series that we're going through called Reclaiming Christmas is really an attempt to say, Christmas is ours. It belongs distinctly to Christianity. It's our Jesus, and it's our celebration of his incarnation and entrance into the world. So it's ours to claim. But listen, in order for us to claim what is rightfully ours, we've got to know how to describe it. We've got to know what it is, and we've got to know what it isn't. What my fear is that for a lot of us, myself included, is that when we think Christmas, our minds jump to those cultural things. Those things that the world tells us Christmas is about. Those things that might not be necessarily bad, but they're not the most important. We think of presents, and we think of cookies, and we think of trees, and we think of lights, and we think of Santa, and those things that are all okay, but they're not really what Christmas is. And so here for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be teaching through what it means to reclaim Christmas. And the way we're going to do that is how we as the Christian faith, how we as followers of the way of Jesus can encounter those things that the world says Christmas is, and then how we can redeem them as rightfully ours and claim them as rightfully ours. Now, if you're here tonight and you would not consider yourself a Christ follower, if you would not consider yourself a Christian, let me speak to you for a moment and say a few things. So this is ultimately an endeavor in what's called cultural engagement. How do we as Christians engage the culture faithfully? Now, the reality is, if you're not a Christian here tonight, you've probably encountered Christians who have done this really, really poorly. When you think of Christians engaging in the culture, you think of picket signs saying who's going to go to hell. You think of, smashing AC/DC CDs, or I guess it'd be records back then, records, and throwing them in a fire. You think of all of those really scary, terrible ways that Christians have engaged the culture. And if that's you, let me say that's not us. That may be some churches, that ain't here. And I want to help us to shape and rethink the way we think about engaging in the culture. It's called cultural engagement. And I preached this on Sunday morning, but it's been just so caught up in my mind of really cultural engagement as Christians means three things. And if you're taking notes, this would be a good thing to write down. First, engaging in the culture as Christians means rejecting what is evil. Rejecting what is evil. Seeing something that is purely bad, purely not true, purely of the enemy, seeing that and saying, face value, I'm rejecting that. So there are some things that we can just look at as Christians and say that is evil, and I'm going to reject that. We see murder, we see burglary, we see pornography, and we say, face value, that is evil. We can say that about a lot of things. All those bad things. Being a San Antonio Spurs fan. All of those things we can... I got to make sure you're listening sometimes. All of those things we can reject. The second way we engage in the culture is by receiving what is good. Receiving what is good. And this may sound pretty simplistic, but I think a lot of Christians have a hard time of really acknowledging what is good and receiving it. So what I mean by that is that some people, some Christ followers, some faithful Christ followers, would say that anything that doesn't happen in the confines of the church is not good. Whereas we, as Wesleyan Christians, what we believe is there's something called prevenient grace. Say prevenient grace. That means that God's grace is in everything. That means that a warm cup of coffee, a beautiful sunrise, a baby crying, God's grace is in all of that. And those are good things to be received. So don't feel guilty if you receive something as good if it doesn't happen in the confines of these walls. The world is something that God has given us to enjoy. And we're called to enjoy it. So reject what is evil, receive what is good, and then where a lot of this sermon series is going to be spent on is at number 3, redeeming what is broken. Can you tell I've gotten good at talking over screaming babies? This is my life all the time. It doesn't even faze me anymore. Redeeming what is broken. So we can look at things and discern, is this good, is this evil, or is this broken? And really, the mission of Jesus Christ and the purpose of the incarnation was to redeem something that was broken. Remember, in Noah's ark, in that time, God judged the world as evil, and so he did away with it, and then he said, never again. So then he sees the world that is sinful and in need of a Savior as not something evil, but as something broken, and so he comes in to redeem it. That's the story of our faith. And so we as Christians, when we engage in culture, when we engage in the cultural practices, we are called to determine whether something is good, evil, or broken. And so throughout this series, we're going to be taking particular cultural things that the world says Christmas is about, and we're going to be viewing them from a Christian angle and seeing what can we redeem out of that, or do we need to full 100% reject it as evil? So tonight, the topic that we're going to be looking at really goes deeper than just the things. So we talked on Sunday morning about the practice of gift giving, the cultural practice of gift giving. How can we redeem that as Christians? Tonight, we're not going to be looking at trees or lights or Santa, but we're going to be looking at something that's sort of underneath all of this holiday season, all of this Christmas season. And that's this feeling of being busy, of constant hurry, of rushing from one thing to another, of wishing that you had more than 24 hours in a day. My guess is that most of us have already felt this. Our college students, you are feeling this right now. There is too much to do and not enough time to do it. And so if we're not careful, this can become a disease that doesn't just kill our Christmas season, but it can run rampant in the rest of our lives as well. Paul David Tripp, a Christian theologian, even goes as far to say that during this particular season of Christmas, that our stress and our hurry and our busyness becomes like an idol that we worship. So you may be saying, if you were here with us in the spring, I preached about, in our 9 to 5 series, we talked about the need for rest. And I don't like preaching really on two things, on the same thing within a calendar year twice, but this is such a pervasive phenomenon and is so counter to the way of Jesus that I think we have to constantly get it in front of our minds that the frenetic pace that we live at is not the way of Jesus. But in America, we've bought into the lie that it is. It's a distinctly American and it's distinctly modern problem that we have. 55% of Americans report that they are stressed during the day. I would guess that if I polled this room, we'd be higher than that. A third of Americans this year will see a doctor for something stress-related. That means a physical symptom, something like a headache, a muscle pain, tension, chest pain, fatigue, upset stomach, sleep problems, anxiety, lack of motivation or focus, irritability or anger. That sounds like the end of a bad prescription commercial. That's all things of stress. 94% of American workers report experiencing stress at their workplace. Again, I would guess that is probably higher here. My guess is that I asked those of you who work whether this was true. It would be higher. I would guess that every single person who works here would raise their hand except for Austin because he works for me, and we hang out all the time. Did y'all see him running around earlier? Yeah, I think he was stressed. And these symptoms are part of a larger societal problem in the West, particularly in America. Americans work longer hours than any other industrialized nation on our planet. At least 134 countries have laws that set the maximum length of the work week. The United States does not. Over 85% of men and 66% of women work more than 40 hours per week. And according to one study, Americans work 137 more hours per year than Japanese workers, 260 more hours per year than British workers, and 500 more hours per year than French workers. We work more than anyone else. And then pile on the stress of work with everything else that happens in your life, with the anxiety and stress of shuttling children from one place to another, from the anxiety and stress that comes from social obligations, from church obligations. Pile on the stress of volunteerism. Pile on the stress of the 24-hour news cycle that constantly warns us of terrible things like impeachment and like global warming and like whatever the news decides to say we should be worried about. Our culture is constantly putting us into this pressure cooker of stress. And then it's Christmas time. Those of you laughing get it. Between all the parties, between all the shopping and all the sales and all the wrappings and all the meals and all the cleaning and all the cleaning again, getting all of that happen, I don't know about you, but sometimes I can't wait for December 26th to finally take a breath. I mentioned earlier that article from Paul David Tripp, and what he says is that we think during the season that if we're not busy, then we haven't made it. We think that we have to work so much because if we don't, we're going to miss out on something. Our social media feeds and our web browsers are filled with holiday activities, with Christmas gifts that we're supposed to buy. And we think if I can't buy that or if I don't have someone to buy that for, then I'm missing out. There's an article from the Mayo Clinic that was entitled Stress, Depression, and the Holidays. Tips for coping. We've gotten to a point now where we're not enjoying the holidays, not celebrating the holidays. We're coping with the holidays. I don't know about you, but I don't think it's supposed to be this way. We've taken Max Weber's Protestant work ethic that says pull yourself up by the bootstraps, which is not a bad idea in itself, but we've taken that to the extreme and said, I can't ever stop working. If Christmas tells us anything, it's peace. It's rest. It's take a break and come into my love where there is no long work week, there is no anxiety, there is no hurry, there is just pure grace. This is the message that the angels proclaim in Luke chapter 2. I'll encourage you, we're going to be reading Luke chapter 2 throughout this teaching series, but spend some time in it because all of the messages of Christmas are packed in here so beautifully. Look there in verse 13. It says, and suddenly there was an angel, it was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, and they were praising God, and they were saying, glory to God in the highest. And on earth, peace among those with whom he is pleased. When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. And then listen to this, verse 16. And they went with haste, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the mangers. The angels proclaim peace. And the only haste that the shepherds have is to get to Jesus. It's not to get to the Black Friday sales. It's not to hurry up and get that food out of the oven. It's not to go from one Christmas pageant to another. It's to get to the manger. Because the way of Jesus is the way of rest. And this is not new news. This is not something that Jesus comes and introduces into the cosmos. This was God's design all along. In Genesis 2, right at the beginning, thus the heavens and the earth were finished. God did his work in 6 days and the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy because on it, God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. Listen, God, when he finished creating the world, did not need to rest, but he knew that you would need to. And so he builds this rhythm into our days that we're supposed to honor. We're even supposed to honor it. It's a commandment. And my guess is that if I went to you and said, do you find it just beyond ideas to murder someone? You would say, of course, it's a commandment. If I said, is it bad to worship a false idol? You would say, of course, it's a commandment. But if I went to you and I said, is it wrong to not take a day off? You might have a different response. when it's a commandment? It's the same as all the others. God has built it into us. He has created us for us. And when we go against it, the only people we're hurting is ourselves. Sabbath and rest and peace is a gift that Jesus comes on Christmas to proclaim to us. That's why Jesus says later on in his life this beautiful phrase from Matthew 11, verses 28 and 30. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and all you who are burdened. And I'm not going to give you more. I'm not going to tell you to go do stuff." He says, "I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's the message of Christmas. It's not do more so you can fit in more. It's take my rest. And I think so much of this is backwards in our time because we've conflated the word busy with the word good. A lot of reclaiming Christmas and reclaiming culture begins with our language. And I'm going to challenge you on this. I've been challenged by it. I messed up today. If someone comes up to you and asks the, passing nothing question, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing? How are things?" My guess is that most of us in here give one of two answers. Right? Because nobody says, like, "I am so glad you asked. Really been having a hard time with my children. They're bickering. They're not obeying. I've got this work issue that's really weighing on my soul. I don't know what my calling in life is. I've also got this weird growth. Would you mind taking it?" We don't do that. What? We give one of two answers. Somebody says, "How's it going?" What do we say? We say, "Good." Or we say, "Busy." Busy. And then the overachievers will say, "Good, busy." We've conflated those two terms. It's as if being busy is somehow a good thing when the way of Jesus is radically different. The way of Jesus is rest, is peace, is grace, is don't do the work because I've done it for you. And so in closing tonight, I want to get real practical. And this latter part of the sermon is for me as much as it is for you, because I'm going to be real honest on this. I can preach this halfway decent. I am terrible at living it out, right? I have not figured it out. I work 50 to 60 hours a week. I go home. I have 2 kids. It's wild at our house. I have the most extroverted wife on the face of the planet. Our social schedules are packed. We are nonstop. And then it's especially hypocritical during the Christmas season. We have 5 Christmas Eve services. I am going to be at the church for over 13 hours, and all 13 of those hours are going to be hard work. I'm bad at this. Keep me accountable, please. I'm going to do it for you too. But 3 ways that we can begin to shift and to reclaim our culture for something beautiful and restful and peaceful this Christmas season. Number 1, and I have a sticky note on my monitor that says this, and you might need this too. Grow your no so God can bless your yes. Grow your no so that God can bless your yes. We feel so obligated to say yes to everything that we're offered to go to. Yes to that party, yes to that pageant, yes to that event. When during this season, one way that we can reclaim the rhythm of Christmas is to say it's not about quantity, it's about quality. This is not an excuse to shuck responsibilities. Please don't hear me wrong. If you don't show up to work tomorrow and tell your boss that you're going to do some Tai Chi and catch up on whatever Mandalorian is, don't tell them it was me, because that's not what I'm saying. The good news is you won't have to go to work Monday if you do that. But if we begin to kind of filter out the things that are not just urgent but are important, and there is a difference between the two, you're going to see your Christmas be much more special. Because you'll remember it not for all the events that you did, but you'll remember it for those special, precious, sweet moments. Grow your no so God can bless your yes. Number 2 is this: get intentional. And I know this intentional is kind of a Christian buzzword that might not have a lot of meaning for all of it. But what I mean is this, is that if you don't control your calendar, someone else will. If you don't take ownership and do intentionality in everything you do during the season, you're going to blink and it's going to be January 2nd and you're going to say, where did all the time go? I have no recollection of what just happened. Take control of your calendar and get intentional about what you do. This is why on your chairs, we've given you a way to do this. Parents in particular, let me speak to you. Family traditions don't just happen. Sweet, precious moments may happen occasionally here and there, but it takes effort on your behalf. And so we've given you ways that in your family, with your roommates, college students, when you go back home, these are ways just to create some special moments, to reclaim Christmas for what it's really about. Watch a Christmas movie about the true meaning of Christmas. Buy the car behind you or the person in Starbucks behind you. Buy their meal, buy their coffee. Sing Christmas carols to your neighbors. Write family cards to 10 friends or family members. Don't just print them off. Do something special as you get intentional about this season. And the last one is this: give yourself grace. Listen, look right at me. You cannot do it all. You cannot please every person in your life. You cannot buy the perfect, meaningful gift for every single person. You cannot attend every event that you are expected at or wanted at. Give yourself grace. If the message of Christmas is about anything, it's the gift of grace. That God has come down, He has put on flesh, He has lived and dwelt among us. And He has said, take on my yoke, take on my burden. It's light, it's easy. Lay yourself down at my throne, and I will give your soul rest. The message of Christmas is that God has given you grace. Listen, you've got to give yourself that grace as well. Let me pray for us. God, we know that